Hello, pilots and flight instructors. Before I get to this episode of the NAFI More Right Rudder podcast, I'd like to take this opportunity to thank this episode's sponsor, Cirrus XM Aviation Weather. Now, it's always great to have a sponsor with a product that I've actually used, and in this case I have. Not just as a pilot myself, but also as a flight instructor. It is an invaluable resource to show my students just how dynamic the world of aviation weather can be, and provide them the understanding of a resource that can keep them safe as they move forward as pilots themselves. So one of my favorite things about Cirrus XM is that unlike other platforms that use ADS-B information, Cirrus XM uses satellite-based information, which means there are no altitude limitations and no line of sight restrictions. What does this actually mean? Well, this means that I can take weather that I collected during my pre-flight brief, and I can take it all the way from the hold short line to my destination. So I can continuously reanalyze how the weather is changing all the way to that $100 hamburger or all the way to the end of that cross-country lesson. So the other nice thing is it provides me the opportunity to allow my student to use that information to make decisions, and I can gauge how well those decisions are being made. So across the board, it's the best in-flight weather information you can get in the industry. If you're interested, SiriusXM has set up a 2-month free trial, and all you have to do is go to aopa.org/SiriusXM. Once again, we thank Cirrus for sponsoring this episode, and I'll say the URL one last time: 2-month free trial, aopa.org/SiriusXM. Hi, I'm John Niehaus, Director of Program Development for the National Association of Flight Instructors. I'd like to welcome you back to another episode of the NAFI More Right Rudder podcast, the podcast for flight instructors on the go. And today I have a special guest, and he is the founder and CEO of ICARUS Devices, which we'll get into a little bit later if you haven't heard of them. But I'd like to welcome Nick Sinopoli to the More Right Rudder podcast. Nick, welcome.
Hey, John, thanks for having me on.
Yeah, we're happy to have you. And for those that don't know, Nick is a fixed wing and rotor wing pilot. He has ambitions of becoming a CFI, probably for both. I think we'll talk about that a little bit later. He graduated from Purdue with an aeronautical and astronautical engineering degree, and currently serves our country as a National Guard air assault pilot in rotorcraft, I believe. And so thank you for your service there, Nick.
Thank you, John.
So yeah, we've got a lot to unpack here, but before we start that, tell us a little bit more about you.
So I'm a pilot and engineer. I started flying when I was about 16, 17, delivering pizzas to get hours in a 172 down in Austin, where I grew up. And then, after high school, went to Purdue and learned engineering, and then went into the military. And for the past 8 years or so, I've been working on the ICARUS Device, which is a smart view limiting device, which came from my experiences as a student pilot industry.
Yeah, and we definitely have some things to talk about as far as that's concerned. For those that don't know, we came across Nick and ICARUS around AirVenture last year. Nick was kind enough to donate a device for the giveaway in the NAFI Professional Development Center tent. And I believe you did a presentation too, didn't you?
Yes, I think so. Yeah.
So we sort of forged that relationship, and the more we've learned about how this whole thing came to be, it's a really cool story. It's a really cool device. And we thought that maybe we could just kind of share how this, where your mind came from developing this idea into putting it into reality. And so first, let's talk a little bit about ICARUS itself. What is ICARUS?
So it's a smart view limiting device, and it replaces the hood or Foggles with a changeable view limiting device. So basically what it is it allows that instructor or safety pilot to simulate whatever weather capabilities or weather conditions that they want to on that given flight. So basically it's just bringing the simulator capability into the aircraft and combining the two. So it's got three basic components. The meat and potatoes is the visor, and then it's got a small power control unit that's about the size of a deck of cards, and then it has an iOS or an Android app that allows that instructor to kind of simulate that changing weather. So it's basically just a better tool for teaching weather decision making or training a specific flight regime. And it does stand for Instrument Conditions Awareness Recognition Understanding System, and I do understand the connotation from the Greek mythological character. That was kind of a big part of the name, and then kind of trying to develop the brand around the name.
Well, of course, in aviation, we love acronyms, so it fits right in, right?
Yeah.
So when you're talking about changing the conditions to simulate something or changing the way that the device simulates various conditions, how does it do that? What do you mean by that?
So the technology behind it is called Polymer Dispersed Liquid Crystals. So this is there's a film, and then in between, in the middle layer of the film, you can see that. So in the middle there is crystal suspended in a gel, and then there's another two layers sandwiching in that, and I run just a very tiny amount of alternating current. And the alternating current, if you vary the frequency, it'll vary how much those crystals are aligned, and you can go from 0 to 100% opacity. I actually got the idea from the Boeing 787 Dreamliner, which at the time was coming out. And in the back, it doesn't have the traditional window shades that you see on every other airliner. It's just got a small dial that can vary that opacity. So I don't use the exact same flavor of film or technology, but it's the same principle. You're using electricity to move something, to move a crystal.
So for those of you not watching the video, and this is on our NAFI YouTube page, but for those of you not watching, it's very similar to if you've ever seen one of those like super fancy bathrooms, and the people have the glass stalls that can go from clear to opaque by flipping a light switch. That's essentially what he just showed us on the view limiting device.
They're very popular in Japan for some reason, and I've seen videos, and I guess it allows you to show that the bathroom is clean, but tourists come in and they don't know how to work it, and you have to lock the door, and then it'll go opaque. It's also popular in boardrooms and stuff like that, or offices. And the film that I use is actually very similar to that one.
So but it's not glass; it's plastic.
Correct. Yeah. And you get kind of different flavors that are designed to either go onto glass or be sandwiched in between glass. But no, it's not, obviously for safety, I can't put glass in front of your head, and
right.
There's a couple other considerations. So it's kind of like a plastic film.
Cool. Okay. So how did you come up with this? I mean, I know you just talked about like the idea of it, but what was engineering this like?
So the idea is the easy part. The idea came from actually, I was learning to fly a helicopter, and we used a piece of paper that would create a hood. Anyways, we had just taken off on a simulated ITO. We're coming right back around to do a PAR, precision approach, a ground controlled approach. Anyways, we had just taken off from this big airfield. We're over a small general aviation airfield, and how the airspace worked was, I think it was the deconfliction was at 800 feet. They stayed below 800 feet. We stayed above it. And I'm flying along, trying to run through all my checklists, and the instructor I'll never forget, I'm sitting there in the right seat and, doing my stuff. And I see his hand, he's sitting in the left seat, kind of come back and then swipe the cyclic straight out of my hand. We go hard left. And I had no idea what was going on. I thought I was doing okay. And then him and the other student in the back that's kind of clearing that right side, because I can't see, start vigorously debating whether or not we almost hit a bird or a plane. And it turned out it was a big buzzer type bird, and it passed inside the rotor arc on my side, on the right side. I wasn't particularly a happy camper at that point. I got this piece of paper on my head. I can't see. I don't really have any, we throw the term essay around. I have no essay of what's going on. And I'm trying to gather it. We come back around and we land and, fill out all the safety reports and stuff. But I'm walking away from the flight line. It was just like, that was not fun. I really wish I could have been able to see outside quickly. And then I was like, why are we using this, piece of cardboard? I had just read about the Boeing 787 and how it uses electrochromatic technology to replace the window shade. And it's like, well, if Boeing can figure out how to put that technology on 200 windows in the back of an airliner and make it cost effective, weight effective, and safe, why can't we use that to train what is arguably one of the most important skills of an aviator, which is instrument flying?
Mm-hmm.
And after that, I had an instructor. I had another issue with the hood, and then I had an instructor. It was on a weather day, and he was talking about how going what we call in the military inadvertent IMC. In the GA world, it's more referred to as VFR into IMC. People are trying to make UIMC, unexpected IMC, happen. He said that was scarier happening in the United States with another instructor on board than getting shot at by the Taliban in Afghanistan.
Oh, geez.
Here I am, all those years later, developed and I'm selling a product, and we're continuing to improve and listen to the CFIs that are on the ramp, actually teaching students and trying to, cover all the sectors of aviation with this system, and trying to really improve how we teach weather and IFR flying and weather decision making and all that goes along with it. Because once you start pulling that string, there's a lot behind it.
Yeah. Yeah. And, and how this whole thing came to be as far as the podcast is concerned is we started talking about not just the ICARUS product, but kind of what you just mentioned of what's behind it. What's part of that thread that you're pulling. And one of the things I love to do is talk to various businesses and people with missions and say, okay, well, what are the popular myths that you want to address or dispel, and how is that connected to whatever it is that you're doing? And in your case, you provided me with a few ideas, and I'd like to talk about some of those because I think they're really interesting, and I think the listening audience will as well. One of the things you mentioned that was part of this is what you call 178 seconds to live. Now, I'm familiar with what that is. I've seen that a few times, and I know HAI has been very involved in. I think they made a new one. Talk to me a little bit about this, and how is it connected, and what's the story?
So, the 178 seconds to live is based on some fairly old research done at the University of Illinois. I believe it was 1958, and that was kind of, it reemerged in the 90s. And when I was, learning to fly, it was a video that you were shown, or it's still very much used. And from my perspective, there isn't a very good, there's a training gap in that you couldn't really simulate inadvertent or VFR into IMC. And we used, and it's a not to go into the statistics, it's a major killer. It's a major reason why airplanes crash. And you see those videos, and they're very suspenseful, and it's a countdown, and it's playing on all those fear emotions. The thing is that from an engineer, from an engineering point of view, I don't like anything that's the research is very old, and it's kind of been extrapolated over the decades to end up at 100. You have 178 seconds to live if you go inadvertent IMC.
So that's and just to clarify, not to interrupt, but just so that people understand what it is that we're talking about, what exactly is the 178 seconds? What are they talking about?
So if you go back to that study, the VFR, I think it was the 180-degree turn study at the University of Illinois, back when the University of Illinois had a flight program. They were basically taking VFR only pilots and simulating in the aircraft that they couldn't see outside with a very basic six-pack, and on average, it was 178 seconds before they lost control notionally. So it was some great research at the time, but that was 60 something odd years ago, and things have changed a bit for the better. And the issues I have with it is that if you just do a purely fear-based instruction, don't ever do that or you're going to die. If you get into that situation, it might help you, and it should help you stay out of it. But if you get into it, it's not going to help you. It's going to hurt you, because that's going to be racing through your brain is, I have 178 seconds to live. And one of the things that I'm really trying to do, especially in 2023, is on the helicopter side of the house, a big part of what we do is inadvertent IMC training, giving those pilots that are out there getting the mission done the best training possible for if they have to go inadvertent IMC, which it happens. What I'm trying to do is take some of those lesson learns and that training profile and bring it to the wider GA VFR private pilot types, because the FAA mandates you have to do 3 hours to simulate IFR. And when I was getting my pilot's license, we're flying back from San Marcos into Austin, where we were just practicing landings. Throw these Foggles on, we'll log you a 0.3 today, and you'll be that much closer to checking all the boxes to be able to take your check ride. That doesn't actually help you all that much if you were to find yourself in that situation of going kind of VFR into more IMC or VFR into marginal VFR VMC, and that's a big part of what we're about here is trying to get people better training, and obviously why we want to work with NAFI is because you guys are the biggest organization of flight instructors, and everybody I talk to at NAFI is there for to learn and to develop and get better about teaching, to pass that knowledge on to the next generation of pilots. So.
Yeah, and that absolutely is something that's really important, because training for training's sake doesn't make sense, right? And I think that kind of summarizes what you just said. Just because, hey, this is a convenient time to put the Foggles on, why don't you go ahead and shoot in the approach? Is that training, or is that just going through the motions? Are the students pulling something from that experience that is useful and that will save them, if that ever happens? Or is it just, okay, this is a forgettable moment, we're just getting 0.2 and an approach? And I used to do that same thing where I used to cancel lessons with students. Mm-hmm. And the school that I was working for would ask me, well, hang on a second, if you're not going to fly in this, you're not going to fly in that, what are you doing? Why aren't you providing these experiences for your students? And the answer to that is if I've got to do all the work, what is the student pulling from?
Right.
Just because, we're going to go and shoot, an actual approach. Well, okay, but if the student's not ready for that, and I'm doing the setup and I'm doing the monitoring and I'm doing the radios, and they're just kind of sitting there watching, is there educational value in that? Go ahead.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. And that training value is important. And one of the issues on the civilian side, is there's a cost aspect. It has to be a business. If it doesn't make dollars, it doesn't make sense. So that's kind of that's also some of the headwinds obviously I face is it's worthwhile to get your students better prepared and build that proficiency faster is a big part of what we do. And
yeah, so it's taking the same amount of time or even less, but providing more valuable training. So where the student is pulling more useful information in less time is really what I hear you're saying.
Yeah, exactly. And if I could just make one point, one of the things about, because the device gets most used for just pure IFR training.
Yeah,
we do a lot of it. No matter where you are, with the device, one of the cool things that you can do and where you can build a lot of that training value. So you're coming down on the instrument approach. When does that training end? It ends when your instructor is like, okay, take the Foggles off, and there's the airport, and guess what? You're magically at decision height, and it just I told you to take it off, and then either do a go around or you come in for a full stop. With the ability to simulate a wide range, any visibility, what we can do is simulate a gradual breakout into marginal conditions. They can break you out into perfect VMC and then simulate that you flew into a cloud again and you got to go do a missed approach after decision height, which can happen in the real world, but we don't practice in training. So, giving that student those more experiences and in a more accurate representation of what it's actually going to be like is what we're all about. It's what the device is all about, and that's the whole point.
That's really interesting. I'm glad you mentioned that point because that's actually something you can't even really do in a simulator effectively. I mean, you can set the base of the clouds and you can say, okay, I want it sort of scattered bases at the bottom, depending on the level of sophistication of your flight sim. But the notion that you get to decision height, you think you've broken out, but it turns out there's a lower cloud between you and the runway, and all of a sudden you're back in. You can't really do that in a simulator. So you're providing something that goes beyond what somebody can already do with existing technology. So I think that's interesting. The other thing is, between my own training, but then also the training I provided for students out there, there's always this weird shuffle, kind of what you said, where, okay, take the Foggles off. Well, you're at 200 feet off the ground trying to get a student pilot, well, not student pilot, but an instrument student to land an airplane, as now they're taking their eyes off the game to figure out how to get this thing off and then reorient themselves to visual conditions without becoming unstable. That can be a bit of a dance. And it's for somebody just starting out to have all of that happen in a period of a couple seconds and still maintain stability. That's difficult.
So two things. One, I've done that dance before, and I've had that dance go very wrong on me.
Oh yeah.
We didn't bend metal or anything like that. But and the second thing is that I tell people it is more complicated to put on and get an ICARUS device set up than a hood or than most hoods and a set of Foggles. A set of Foggles is just like, it's a piece. Foggles are just safety glasses, 10 cents from China, and they've been etched or you put vinyl over them, whatever. But in the aircraft, it is much more seamless to just hit a button on an app and they break, you break out, and you don't have to borrow a theater term, you don't have to break the fourth wall in training.
Mm-hmm.
It's just, there is none of that dance. The instructor does not have to take control, which is important. And that breakout can be seamless. And that's the important part, is from a simulation point of view, the less that you can take people out of this scenario, the better. So from what I do, those Foggles, they have those really chunky temples,
mm-hmm.
and they pinch. And it's just a constant reminder that you've got something on.
Yeah.
the device is designed to be as lightweight as possible. And I tell people, it's a safety point of view thing. And I fly a decent amount of night vision goggles, and I don't like having a bunch of stuff on my head. My neck hurts afterwards. So there's that. But from a simulation point of view, if it's light enough and it's clear, I can get you to forget you're wearing it. And then 40 minutes into the flight, when somebody gives you an inadvertent IMC scenario, guess what? You're going to get that startle factor and that primal response that you're not going to get in a simulator, and you're not going to get with hoods and foggles. And that's what's so dangerous about the scenario, is that we don't practice the transition, and the transition is what kills people.
Mm-hmm.
It's not flying along in IMC, with a pure instrument scan. It's the transition from visual to instrument, and that's what's tough. And that's why we get paid as pilots, is to make those decisions and make those transitions.
I completely agree. And I'm a sucker for technology, so I'm super interested in all of the new ways of doing things. I think this is a very innovative piece of tech to allow for better training. On that list that you provided me, one of the other things you said was kind of a passion project for you was the concept of currency versus proficiency.
Yes.
How does that link with the ICARUS? And let's talk a little bit about this.
So, I kind of break it down into 3 levels. There's art. Is the aircraft and is the pilot legal for IFR? And that's, is it an instrument certified aircraft, and is it an instrument certified pilot? And that's kind of like the first overarching level. The currency level is, obviously there's some currency with the aircraft. The aircraft has to have checks and all that stuff. But for the pilot has to be current in for IFR. And that's what we focus on, is making sure you stay current. But what really matters are you proficient? Because I can list you off all the things I've seen of the aircraft was not IFR certified, but they came back that night or that day when they flew into some bad weather, because avionics, I'm sure you've seen, have gotten much, much better. And we have a lot more SA in the cockpit than the steam gauges that, most of us grew up on. But for the pilot proficiency side is, did you go out there and did you log your approaches? Maybe. Yes, sure you did. But if that was 6 months ago, how proficient really are you? And that's one of the things, one of the points that I try and make is, it's going to get you to a higher level of proficiency faster. And that maybe not the ultimate level of proficiency, but especially when we talk inadvertent IMC, but just basic IFR procedures, that go around, or I have some people that they really love simulating you take off with the device in clear, and at 500 feet, I instantly put you in the suit, which can be pretty jarring. And for me, and how I know I'm a pilot is, it takes me, if I haven't flown a week or two and I'm in the helicopter, it takes me a little bit of stick wiggling time to get kind of warmed up, if you will. So where we see kind of problems is you just took off, and at 500 feet, 30 seconds later, after you've started manipulating the controls, you are in the soup on an IFR flight plane, or in IMC. So what I'd like people to focus more on is the proficiency side, not just the I'm current side.
So it kind of goes back to again, as we've previously mentioned, the value of the training that you're receiving. I think going back to the whole Foggles thing, there isn't very easy ways to begin that process. The student knows it's coming, right? So if you go, all right, I'm going to take controls, go ahead and put the Foggles on, you're at 3,000 feet, you're level, you're stabilized, everything's cool. Now sneaky instructors can, while the student's putting that on, you can start getting a little unstable and doing things to kind of screw with the student. Yeah. But they know it's coming. There's no way to surprise them by saying, here's the Foggles. You can't just magically make it appear. And so to your point, with the ability to, without saying a word, without taking controls, without making any adjustments, to be able to put somebody in a real world sort of uncomfortable situation safely, that's the value of that training increases. And I think that's a good point. It's stuff that you could previously only do in a simulator. And even with a simulator, there's limitations, but there's also, I've found, having done a ton of instruction, both again for myself and for students, there's you can only go so far. There's a perceived level of safety in a sim. So that if you screw up, you're just going to pause it. You're going to bring it back. Nothing bad's going to happen. Worst case scenario, you red screen the sim, and we talk about it and move on. So while that instruction is valuable, and I don't mean to discount the simulators themselves, there's a certain amount of healthy fear as well when it's real life, when yes, okay, the instructor's there for a reason and they will keep me safe, but you can't take that edge completely off.
Right. And I'm thinking back to in the helicopter EMS industry, there's that training gap is, we're obviously trying to close it, but you can go into ground-based simulator and you can do inadvertent IMC. And I always tell people, simulators are excellent training for learning a new aircraft, for emergency procedures, for learning IFR. They don't do a good job for inadvertent IMC, but they're used because that's the only place you can really replicate it. Up until we started selling ICARUS devices, because once that you take away that visual, your body immediately, your brain is on. I'm in a box in a warehouse, and that disorientation is not going to happen because you know where you are and you're safe. And when we were first starting out, our first big deal was Metro Aviation in Shreveport, which is family owned but large. Mostly they do EMS work, so all sorts of different programs out there. And we did got them a device, and I'm going to do a shout out to my friend, dear friend Matt Johnson in Ohio, and he's taking up, and it's a 10,000 hour pilot, been there, done that, a master of his craft. And Matt's giving him a check ride, and he used the device as I kind of just described, where it's clear for 40 minutes. They're going about the flight, doing other training items, and then they're taken off out of a simulated scene call, out of a field. They're 200 or 300 feet. Matt puts him in a turn, and then boom, gives him an inadvertent IMC. Like I said, 10,000 hour, very experienced pilot, and he didn't lose control, but he was, a little bit more wobbly than trying to get the aircraft transitioning from a visual to an instrument scan. And he came back and he talked about what he was feeling, and said that was the best training, but I was feeling something. The only time I'd ever really felt like that was when I went inadvertent IMC, 10 years ago. And I was very lucky enough to be able to make the deal with them and get all their pilot ICARUS training. And that was, you look back on the past 7 or 8 years, that was a massive milestone, was being able to provide those pilots that training. And that's what I'm trying to provide everybody, is that ability to take that training to the next level. I think back to when you're learning a new aircraft, and it can be pretty useful just to sit in a cockpit cutout that just has all the buttons and switches, and you're looking on, okay, this is here, that's there. But then you want to move on, and maybe you have there's varying levels. So what ICARUS is just that next level of training.
Yeah, no, I agree. And I've done that stuff too. And again, it comes back to, nobody wants to be scared in an airplane. That's not the intent of any kind of training whatsoever, because you scare a student, you potentially turn them off to the act of flying altogether. However, there's a little bit of stress, and I've seen a ton of graphs and research done that a little bit of stress is a motivator. A little bit of stress provides a memory of what you learned during that period of time. So being able to provide some of that stress in an actual airplane safely I think that there's some merit to that, because again, you go back to the simulators, and yeah, there are some very effective simulators, and the full motion sims and some of the level D stuff and all of that. I mean, they do really good job with doing that. But again, ultimately, no matter how invested you get in the situation, you still know, hey, if something goes bad here, I'm not going to get hurt.
Right.
And I mean, I guess you want the student to realize that they're not going to get hurt in the airplane too, but you can't fully disconnect from the fact that, hey, I'm in a moving airplane, anything could happen.
Yeah. And there's a term we use in the military, stress inoculation. You're trying to simulate so that if you do find yourself in the scenario, and where I'll tie that to training is everybody does it, or everybody should do it. You learn in a single engine aircraft, what's your instructor going to do? Pull that power back, slide that twist grip off on you, and then it's what are you going to do? In a helicopter, you should drill down to, you need to enter an auto rotation. In an airplane, you need to enter your best glide profile and start troubleshooting and know when to stop troubleshooting and just focus on putting that aircraft down in the safest way possible. The big problem with inadvertent IMC, spatial disorientation, and those type of accidents is you've never had that training. You just had the fear-based training, and we can talk all about the things in your inner ear and what can happen and the visual illusions. But if I can't replicate for that for you, because what happens, what do you hear from people when they do get in that scenario? They enter the auto rotation, they enter the glide, and you revert back to your training, and if you don't have that training to revert back to, guess what? Making it up that's not a good place to start just making it up or just start doing it for the first time. So with ICARUS, that's what we're trying to give you, is that ability to train in the aircraft as realistically as possible for that emergency. And what that's kind of morphed into, I'll be honest, when I first started out, it was all about just that visual fidelity of what it looks like to go into a cloud. And that portion of it that I just described was going to be the entire way that we were going to reduce the fatal accident rate. What I've since realized is that weather decision making is the bigger is almost as an equal level of where you're going to affect that rate of accidents, and giving that instructor the ability to say, okay, well, I'm just going to bring the visibility down slowly on you and get you to say, I would turn around, or I would divert to that airport, or I would pick up and transition to an emergency IFR flight plan. I'd call approach. Okay, well, let's go do that. So that's something we're really trying to focus on as well. That weather decision making aspect, and giving you, the instructor, the ability to introduce that.
Interesting. Yeah, that brings the whole buzzword of scenario based training to a whole nother level, right? Nick, again, as we sort of come to a close on this, it's always fun to see how people see deficiencies and problems in the environment, in the industry, and come up with ways to address them. As you say on your website, which is, for those that aren't familiar, it's ICARUSdevices.com. But as you say on here, since the original flight training device that you just mentioned, in 1929, I'm looking at, there hasn't been a whole lot of improvements, and it's cool to see somebody looking at something and trying to find improvement. Something that maybe at one point people said, "Hey, Foggles are the best there is." They're simple. There's no reason to improve it. I think you found a way.
That's the way we've always done it.
That's the way we've always done it.
I hate that phrase.
The death of a lot of great ideas this is the way it's always been done. So it's fun to know that there's somebody out there who's seeing ways of making things better, and it seems like you're doing it for the right reasons. Again, referencing some of the people that you've been acquainted with, that maybe you could have made a difference if this was out before then. But I think it's admirable. So I appreciate you coming on and talking to me about this and telling us a little bit about the history and how this could really make a big difference moving forward.
Yeah, thank you so much, John. I really appreciate it, and such a pleasure. Looking forward to seeing everybody at NAFI at Oshkosh again in 2023. And
Yeah.
yeah.
Any final thoughts, or is there? Can they buy the device on the website? Do they have to go through a distributor? What's the information?
Yep, you can buy directly on the website. There's a contact page, so please reach out if you have any questions. Looking forward to getting more out there. That's we're at that stage right now, so just trying to get it out there, and always looking for kind of the good, the bad, and the ugly. Tell me what you're thinking. If there's something you'd want to see, let me know, and maybe we can I'm all about finding solutions and making improvements. So
fantastic. Well, thanks for joining us today. And for those of you listening, if you like what the podcast has to offer, please feel free to find us on any of the outlets that you receive podcasts. And if you feel so inclined, feel free to drop us a rating. That helps get our name out there and get us more pilots to listen. So thank you so much for joining us today, and on to the next.
Thanks, John. Take care. Fly safe.
Hey, NAFI members. Nick here. Thank you for listening, and please use the discount code NAFI for 10% off your very own ICARUS device for the next month.